Hi everyone, this is Ed with iCracked. We're going to show you how to do an iPhone 6 display assembly today. Here we have an iPhone 6 with the damaged display. We're going to show you how to remove the damaged display assembly and install a replacement display assembly. Some of the first things that we want to do is verify that everything on the phone functions. I like to plug it into a charger to begin and then record the charging. This one is currently at 83%. We want the battery to charge at minimum 1% so that we know the charging circuitry is functioning. I'm going to test the home button, the digitizer. To test the digitizer is you grab an icon till it gets jiggly and then you grab it and move it all over the screen. The icon should not drop. So we know that the digitizer is functioning, which since it's cracked, it has to be replaced, but we want to make sure there's no other damage to the logic board. And if you had a dead spot, that could indicate that. We want to test that the cameras work, both front and rear. So there's the rear. Flip it over to the front. Now, the iPhone 6 has 3 microphones. And the way to test it is on the rear camera is record a video, flip it to the front camera, and record a video, and that will test the front microphone. And then using voice memo to test the lower microphone. Once you've tested all those and you're satisfied all 3 microphones and the camera are working, then we'll go ahead and proceed with the repair. This phone is now up to 84%, so we know that the phone is in fact charging. I'll go ahead and disconnect the charging cable and power down the device. But before I power it down, we want to make sure we close any open applications to prevent any software corruption in the event of a wrongful shutdown. Now that every application is shut down, we'll go ahead and power off the device. While it's powering down, we'll go over the tools needed for this repair. Included in your do-it-yourself kit is an orange-handled pentalobe screwdriver, a blue-handled Phillips screwdriver, an ESD-safe nylon spudger, a suction cup for lifting the screen, and a plastic pry tool. Now I'm using a magnetic mat to set all my screws on to keep them nice and organized and so they don't fall over the place. The first step, now that the phone is shut down, is to go ahead and remove the 2 pentalobe screws which are located both left and right of the charging port. Our next step is going to be to lift the screen. Now, if your screen is badly cracked, you're going to put a couple of layers of tape on here to create a suction point for the suction cup. Or if you own an iCracked tool, then you could place it over here, squeeze and clamp, and the screen will pop off. But since this isn't included, we're going to show you with the tools that are included in your kit. So I'm going to place the suction cup just above the home button, holding the outside edge of the frame and grabbing the suction cup. I'm going to gently lift to create a gap. Once that gap is opened, I'm going to take the plastic pry tool or the ESD safe spudger, get underneath there, and gently pop the screen up. And I always tilt upwards to push the screen up, as there's several components below here, and if you push downward, you could damage other parts of the phone. Now that I've created the gap and got it loose, I'm going to go ahead and lift the screen up to a 90-degree angle. Now you don't want to pull or tug the cable because of the flex cables that connect several components of the display assembly to the logic board. The first thing we want to do is provide protection by removing the battery cover and disconnecting the battery from the logic board. I'm going to remove the 2 screws. You want to try to do this holding the display assembly upward. You don't want it to fall back and accidentally tear or damage anything else, as 2 of the 4 cables connecting here are going to be transferred to the new screen. Now that my 2 screws are removed, I'm going to go ahead and remove the battery cover. The retaining bracket holds the cables down into place. And using the nylon spudger, I'm going to come in here and very carefully disconnect the battery. Fold that out of the way. Next, we're going to remove the LCD flex cable retaining bracket located at the top of the phone. There's a total of 5 screws that have to be removed using the Phillips screwdriver. Now you want to keep the screws well organized, as they're all different lengths and shapes, and we don't want to get them mixed up. So I removed the 2 top left and rights. Now I'm removing the center screw, and then the bottom left and right. Once those 5 screws are off, then I can go in here and remove the bracket that holds all the cables onto the logic board. Now I'm going to start off with this cable on the outside. This is the cable that connects all the way up to your home button flex cable. Now in order to connect this, I'm going to use the pointed end of the nylon spudger, and I'm going to make sure that I get just underneath to disconnect the cable. You don't want to force it or dig down into the logic board, because you could risk damaging other components. The next one is the accessory cable, which has the front-facing camera, the front upper microphone, ambient light sensor, and proximity sensor attached. The next one is the display flex cable. And the last one is the touchscreen flex cable. Now that the 4 cables are connected, I can separate the 2 pieces. So I've got my display assembly and my phone with frame here. I'm going to go ahead and set this aside for now. Now there's several items that have to be moved from this display assembly over to the new replacement display assembly. I'm going to start off by removing the retaining bracket that holds the ear speaker and front camera assembly into place. There's 3 Phillips head screws attaching this retaining plate to the display assembly. Once the 3 screws are removed, then I'll go ahead and lift the retaining bracket off. And very carefully, I'm going to lift the front-facing camera up and back, and then come in and remove the ear speaker. Next, I'm going to go to the bottom end of the phone and remove the 2 screws that hold the home button bracket in place. Now that the 2 screws are removed, then I can lift the home button retaining bracket out. Now the home button, located here, has a flex cable that attaches to an extension cable that runs all the way up the length of the phone. So I'm going to very gently take my nylon spudger and disconnect the home button flex cable from that extension cable. And very cautiously come under and disconnect and fold it over. Then we're going to take the flat end of the nylon spudger and run it underneath the home button and press upward to break the adhesive seal. Next, I'm going to remove the thermal plate, which also houses the extension cable. There's 3 screws on the left and the right side of the display assembly, and then a single screw located down at the bottom just to the right of the home button. Now the 6 total screws on the side are all the same size, so when you remove them, you can bunch them all together. The screw located at the very base next to the home button is a different size and length. Should you accidentally mix these up, you could insert a longer screw, which will thread through and then ruin the paint on the front of the display assembly. So it's very important that you keep these screws well organized. Now that I've got the 6 side screws, I'm going to remove the remaining single screw at the bottom of the display assembly. Now the thermal plate itself will lift upward, but from the cable running down the length, it is held to the plastic bezel with adhesive. So we're going to have to turn over to the display and heat this area of the glass to get that adhesive to loosen. I'm going to use a hair dryer or a hot air gun and give it a little blast of hot air. Just a couple of seconds is enough. Then I'm very, very cautiously going to peel the home button flex cable off of the bezel. As you can see, it has adhesive located here. If this cable gets ripped or torn or damaged, it'll have to be replaced. Now, this flex cable has an integrated circuit that locks the biometric scanner to the phone. So even if you replace this home button cable, you're only going to be able to use the home button, but you will lose any fingerprint detection on this home button. After that's removed, then I can come up and very gently lift the thermal plate and lift that cable up to remove it off the bezel. As you can see right here, there's adhesive also. Don't pull on this cable. If it's not coming off, turn the glass over and heat it a little more. And lastly, we want to remove the front-facing camera cable located at the top. So using the pointed end of the nylon spudger, we're going to very gently lift the ambient light and proximity sensor out of the bracket. Now, the upper front microphone is held to the display assembly with adhesive. So we're going to have to turn it over and heat this area of the glass as well to loosen that adhesive. Now, for the purpose of this video and to better show you this, I'm going to flip this cable over. Don't do this during your repair because you could accidentally rip or damage that. So I'm going to once again take my hairdryer or hot air gun, give the glass a blast of hot air. Just a few seconds, we're not overheating this. Now that the glass is heated up enough, I'm going to take my nylon spudger. So we're going to come in and very gently lift the microphone out as it's held in place with adhesive. And the whole cable will come up as one piece. Now, if you're working on a black display assembly, inside this area where the ambient light sensor sat will be a white paper filter. That will have to be peeled out and moved over to the new display assembly for your proximity sensor to properly function. Also, on the ambient light sensor is a rubber gasket attached to the end. We want to make sure that that stayed onto the ambient light sensor. If it stayed inside the body of the bezel, you could just peel it out and then reattach it right there. Now everything is stripped down and we're ready to transfer everything to the new display assembly. Now that we have our new display assembly, we're going to go ahead and transfer all the components that we removed earlier onto the new screen. The first step we're going to do is go ahead and take the front-facing camera cable, take the microphone and drop it onto the pin that aligns the cable in the bezel located at the very top. Next, we're going to remove the anti-static protective shield from the back side of the LCD. Then we're going to take the thermal plate and place it back in here. One thing to remember is make sure that the thermal plate will drop underneath the upper end of the LCD flex where this long silver controller bar is. So we're going to come up under this, lay the thermal plate into place, make sure that the two bottom holes and the top hole are lined up on the bezel, then take the flex cable and gently nudge it down. So we're going to make sure that it drops right in front of this little ledge located on the new display assembly. So we're going to reinstall the 6 side screws removed earlier using the Phillips screwdriver. And lastly, we're going to install the single screw located at the very bottom of the thermal plate. Now that those 7 total screws are installed, we're going to take the home button flex cable and we're going to set the home button back inside its port. So you're going to drop the flex cable down onto the 2 alignment pins located here and here. And then take the flex cable and reconnect it to the extension cable. Next, we're going to take the home button retaining plate, lay it over the top of the home button, and insert the 2 Phillips screws. At the very bottom of the home button retaining plate, you also have another alignment pin to drop the bracket onto to make sure it's located in the correct location. Once the 2 screws are tightened, go ahead and test the home button to make sure you have that same click as you did before. Next, we're going to take the front-facing camera cable and we're going to tuck the ambient light sensor and the proximity sensor into the bezel. We want to once again verify that the rubber gasket is still on the end of the ambient light sensor, and if this was a black display, that you transferred the ambient light sensor filter to the new display before we attach this. So you're going to take the ambient light sensor and tuck it down along with the proximity sensor. We'll drop them down into the brackets to ensure that the cable sits nice and flush. Next, we're going to take the ear speaker. On the bottom of the ear speaker, in the bottom of the ear speaker, you want to make sure this oval area drops into the oval area located here on the rubber boot. So make sure it drops into the oval area here in the boot on the new display assembly. Now to install the ear speaker, we're going to very gently pull the front-facing camera back, line up the ear speaker, and press it into the rubber boot. Then we're going to take the front camera, wrap it over the top of the ear speaker, and make sure that the front camera drops into the centering bracket. Now the ear speaker contacts are located on a little overhang on the top of the cable. We want to make sure this doesn't get tucked underneath the cable and then it lays down on top of the springs of the ear speaker. We'll take the ear speaker retaining bracket, which you'll see two small holes in the center that will line up on the two holes or two pins. So we'll take the ear speaker bracket, and you'll see two small holes in the bracket that have to line up on the two pins located at the top of the bezel. So the ear speaker flex cable should drop over those pins, and then the bracket will go down. So the pins must pass through the flex cable and through the ear speaker retaining bracket. Okay, so the ear speaker flex cable has two holes in it that line onto the two pins on the very top of the ear speaker. You want to press those down. Take the ear speaker bracket, which has the two holes. The ear speaker retaining bracket has two holes that drop over those pins. So when it's correctly assembled, the two pins on the ear speaker will have ear speaker, flex cable, and then pass through the metal bracket like that. Using your finger, holding the alignment down, we're going to take the 3 Phillips screws and install them. Once the 3 screws are in, double check that the pins have come up through the metal bracket. Now we're ready to attach the display assembly back onto the logic board. Okay, now we're going to attach the display assembly back to the logic board. One important thing is to make sure that all the cables sit directly on top of one another. If any of the cables are tucked under one of the other ones, especially the home button cable, tends to get underneath the front camera cable. So all 4 cables should sit directly over one another. The first one we're going to connect is the digitizer. Now you're going to line this cable up and then give it a gentle push, and you should hear and feel it snap down into place. Next, we're going to connect the LCD cable. In the same manner, we're going to line it up. Now this can take a few tries. You don't want to ever force these connections down, because you'll damage the connections on the logic board and ruin the phone. So once they're there, go ahead and push, and you should again feel a snap. Next, we're going to connect the front-facing camera accessory cable. And again, you're going to line it up, press it down, and you'll feel a slight snap. Lastly, we're going to hook up the home button cable and line it up and give it a nice press, and you'll once again feel it snap. Now that the 4 cables are attached, we'll connect the retaining bracket. Now that all 4 are firmly connected, I'm going to take the flex cable retaining bracket, line it up, and hold it in place with my finger, and reinstall the 5 Phillips screws. I'll start with the center screw. And then work my way around counterclockwise. Now that the 5 screws are installed, the last thing we're going to do here is connect the battery back to the logic board. Line it up and press it down, and you should feel it drop into place. Then we'll take the retaining plate that covers the battery and the charging port flex cable, line it up, and install the 2 Phillips screws. Now that the battery is reconnected and the battery retaining plate and the 2 screws are installed, what I'll do before I close the phone is go ahead and power it on and test everything that we moved over. We want to make sure that we get a nice video display and that the touch screen is working, as well as the front microphone and the front camera and the proximity sensor before we fully close the phone. Now that the phone is booted, we're going to go ahead and do a functionality test. We're going to make sure our digitizer works by performing the same step we did earlier, grabbing an icon till it's shaky, moving it all over the screen to ensure it doesn't drop, make sure it goes off page and back on page. Test the home button, double click it, should return. Check your front camera and microphone. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, and then playing it back. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. So we know the front camera and the microphone are working. To test the proximity sensor, we'll create a voice memo and then play back that memo. Now, by default, the speaker on voice memo will be blue. We'll touch it so it turns white or gray, and then play the voice memo that we recorded. Placing our finger over the proximity sensor hole just above the ear speaker, the screen should darken, and when I pull my finger away, it should light back up like so. So now we know everything is fully functioning. I'll go ahead and power back down the phone and continue by closing the phone up. So at the top of the phone, you're going to see these brackets on the top of the display assembly. They slide into the frame, keeping the display assembly from popping out. So we're going to take and slightly pull the display assembly forward and slide it down into the frame. So we're creating about a 10 to 15 degree angle. Check to make sure that display assembly is lined up with the top corners, and then pushing the bottom in and then running our fingers up the left and right side, and the display assembly should now be flush all the way around the frame. We're going to take our pencil lobe screwdriver and insert and tighten the pencil lobe screws located at the bottom left and right of the charging port. Once those are installed, we'll go ahead and power the phone back on. Now peel off this protective screen. Now you've just prepared your iPhone 6.